A Christmas miracle. The Harris family winter struggles. The cold that winter was relentless, like it was trying to seep into the very soul of Pineville. For the Harris family, it seemed to echo their struggles. Their small, weathered house stood on the edge of town, surrounded by snow-covered fields that looked beautiful but offered no warmth. The walls were thin and the heater barely worked. Inside, blankets were piled high, and the family wore coats even indoors. Ellie Harris, just 10 years old, watched her mother Clara stir a thin pot of soup in their tiny kitchen. Her brother Max sat at the table, drawing a Christmas tree on the back of an old grocery list. He hummed a holiday tune softly, trying to bring some cheer into the room. Their father, David, had come home earlier that day, his shoulders slumped and his face lined with worry. He'd spent hours walking in the snow, knocking on doors, looking for work. It was the same story everywhere. No one was hiring. "Dad," Ellie asked softly, sitting beside him, "are we going to have Christmas this year?" David looked at her, his heart breaking. He wanted to promise her the world, but all he could do was squeeze her hand and say, "We'll make it special, Ellie. I promise." That evening, as the wind howled outside and frost crept up the windows, Ellie sat at the small kitchen table. She'd made up her mind. If her parents couldn't fix Christmas, maybe she could. She grabbed a piece of paper from her school notebook and a pencil, her hand shaking slightly in the cold. She began to write, "Dear Santa, I don't need toys this year. I just want my family to smile again. Please help my dad find a job. Please help my mom not be so tired. And please, if you can, bring us a little bit of Christmas magic. Love, Ellie." She folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope. Looking around to make sure no one was watching, she slipped on her boots and coat, then crept outside into the freezing night. The walk to the mailbox at the end of the street felt endless. Snow crunched under her feet, and the icy wind whipped at her face, but Ellie didn't stop. The mailbox stood tall and silent, its metal surface frosted over. With trembling hands, she slid her letter inside. "Please, Santa," she whispered into the stillness. "Don't forget us." The next day, Ellie awoke to the sound of her parents talking in low, worried tones. She stayed upstairs, listening quietly. "We're barely scraping by, Clara," David said. "I've tried every shop, every factory. There's nothing. We'll get through this," Clara replied, though her voice wavered. "We always do." Ellie didn't understand why her parents seemed to carry so much weight. She only knew that Christmas was supposed to be a time of joy, and this year, it felt like joy had forgotten their address. That afternoon, Max tried to cheer her up. "Let's build a snowman," he said, pulling her outside. They bundled up and trudged into the yard, rolling snow into lopsided shapes. Ellie smiled for her brother's sake, but inside, she wondered if Santa would even get her letter in time. On Christmas Eve, as the family huddled in the living room, trying to keep warm, there was a knock at the door. David opened it cautiously, surprised to see a tall man standing there, his red scarf bright against the snowy backdrop. Behind him, a sleigh stood in the driveway, piled high with boxes. "Good evening," the man said warmly. "I'm Nicholas. I work with a charitable organization, and we've heard about families in need. May I come in?" David hesitated, but Clara stepped forward, her tired face softening. "Please come in." Nicholas entered, bringing an aura of warmth with him. He moved gracefully, as if he belonged there. "It's the season of giving," he said, smiling. "And tonight, I have a few things that might brighten your holiday." Nicholas led the family outside, where his sleigh gleamed under the moonlight. Ellie's eyes widened as he began unloading box after box. There were groceries, fresh bread, canned goods, even a turkey. There were warm clothes, coats, scarves, gloves, and a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. Max gasped when he saw the shiny red sled sitting on top of the pile. "How did you know?" Clara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "How did you know we needed this?" Nicholas smiled, his twinkling eyes meeting Ellie's. "Sometimes, when you ask for help, it finds its way to you." Ellie felt her heart race. She hadn't told anyone about her letter to Santa. How could he know? That night, for the first time in months, the Harris family sat down to a proper meal. The house smelled of roasted turkey and fresh bread, and the warm glow of the Christmas tree filled the room. Nicholas stayed, sharing stories that made everyone laugh, even David. "Where are you from?" Clara asked as they finished dessert. Nicholas smiled mysteriously. "Oh, here and there." "Do you do this for many families?" David asked. Nicholas nodded. "As many as I can." Ellie couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Nicholas than he let on. She decided to stay awake and watch him, determined to uncover his secret. Late that night, while everyone else slept, Ellie crept downstairs. Nicholas sat by the dying fire, staring into the flames. He didn't seem surprised when she approached. "You're not just someone from a charity, are you?" she asked, her voice trembling. Nicholas turned to her, his expression kind. "What makes you say that?" Ellie hesitated. "Because I wrote a letter to Santa, and you brought everything I asked for." Nicholas smiled softly. Sometimes, when people believe strongly enough, their wishes have a way of being heard. Before she could ask more, a gust of wind blew through the house. Nicholas stood, pulling on his coat and scarf. "It's time for me to go," he said. "But remember, Ellie, magic is all around you. You just have to believe." He stepped outside, and when Ellie ran after him, he was gone. The sleigh, the tracks in the snow, everything had vanished. On Christmas morning, the family awoke to a house filled with light and laughter. Ellie noticed an envelope sitting on the mantel. Inside was a letter addressed to her father. "To David Harris, I've arranged an interview for you at Pineville Furniture Makers. They're looking for skilled carpenters, and I believe you're the perfect fit. Merry Christmas. Yours, Nicholas." David stared at the letter in disbelief, then at Ellie. "Who was that man?" he asked. Ellie smiled, her heart full of wonder. A miracle. As the family celebrated, Ellie slipped outside. She looked up at the snowy sky, and for a moment, she thought she heard the faint sound of bells. A shadow crossed the moon, and a warm laugh echoed in the air. "Merry Christmas," Ellie whispered, her face glowing with hope. The days after Christmas felt like a dream for the Harris family. David, fueled by the hope Nicholas had given him, prepared for the interview at Pineville Furniture Makers. It had been years since he felt this kind of purpose, and though he was nervous, the thought of providing for his family again gave him strength. Ellie and Max spent their days sledding on the hill behind their house, their laughter echoing through the crisp winter air. For the first time in months, the weight of worry seemed to have lifted from their small home. Clara, though still working at the diner, looked more rested, her usual tiredness replaced with a glimmer of happiness. But Ellie couldn't stop thinking about Nicholas. Who was he? How had he known exactly what they needed? And most of all, where had he gone? A week after Christmas, Ellie was walking to the local library when she saw a figure in a red scarf crossing the town square. Her heart leapt. It was Nicholas. She ran toward him, calling out, "Wait, Nicholas!" The man turned, his familiar twinkling eyes meeting hers. "Ellie," he said warmly, "out for an adventure?" "You disappeared," she said breathlessly. "I have so many questions." Nicholas smiled but didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward a bench. "Walk with me for a moment." As they sat, he looked out at the snowy town. "Do you believe in miracles, Ellie?" She nodded. "I do now." "That's good," Nicholas said, his tone soft. "Because the world is full of them. Sometimes people just need a little reminder." "But how did you know about my family? About my letter to Santa?" she asked. Nicholas leaned back, his smile deepening. "Let's just say I have a way of hearing wishes that come from the heart. And yours, Ellie, was one of the strongest I've ever heard." Ellie was silent, her mind racing. Was Nicholas Santa or an angel? Before she could ask, he stood. "It's time for me to go," he said. "But remember, Ellie, what you gave your family wasn't just a miracle. It was love. That's the greatest gift of all." With that, he tipped his hat and walked away. Ellie watched until he disappeared into the snow. The day of David's interview arrived. He dressed in his best clothes, though they were old and patched. Clara kissed him on the cheek, her eyes filled with hope. "You've got this," she said. At Pineville Furniture Makers, the manager, Mr. Thatcher, greeted David warmly. "I've heard great things about your skills," he said. "Let's see what you can do." David's hands, though rusty, moved with precision as he crafted a chair from a block of wood. By the end of the day, Mr. Thatcher shook his hand firmly. "You're hired," he said. "Welcome aboard." When David returned home with the news, the family erupted in cheers. Ellie hugged her father tightly. "I knew you could do it," she said. "That man Nicholas," David said thoughtfully. "I don't know who he was, but I'll never forget what he did for us." As the weeks turned into months, life in the Harris household transformed. David's steady job allowed them to catch up on bills and even save a little. Clara reduced her hours at the diner, finally getting the rest she needed. Ellie and Max started dreaming of the future again, their laughter a constant presence in the home. One evening, Ellie found a small red envelope tucked into the branches of their Christmas tree. Inside was a single piece of paper with the words, "Believe in the magic of love and kindness. Pass it on." Ellie held the note close to her heart. She didn't know how it had gotten there, but she knew one thing. Nicholas had left it as a reminder. From that day forward, the Harris family made it their mission to help others. They volunteered at food banks, donated clothes, and hosted holiday dinners for neighbors in need. They didn't have much, but they gave what they could, spreading the same kindness Nicholas had shown them. The end.